of the AI Sports Report.
Italian doubles experts Sara Errani and Andrea Vavasori successfully retained their US Open mixed doubles crown, defeating singles stars Iga Swiatek and Casper Ruud 6-3, 5-7, 10-6 in Wednesday's final. The Italian pair dedicated their triumph to doubles specialists excluded from the 16-team draw. "This is for all the doubles players who couldn't play this tournament," Errani stated. Vavasori described their campaign as a mission, adding, "We showed that doubles is a great product and in the future we need more marketing and visibility." That's the latest sport. For more, go to gbnews.com.
Visit cheersbritannia.com to join the club today and get 10% off a selection of great British beers when you subscribe. Please drink responsibly.
If your car finance was mis-sold, you can reclaim what you're owed. Reclaim 24/7. Reclaim 24/7.
You might not know if you were mis-sold car finance, but finding out is quick and easy. Simply enter a few details at reclaim247.co.uk and we'll check if you have a claim and what you could be owed. Text WORD to 77777 or visit reclaim247.co.uk.
Reclaim 24/7.
Tracy spent weeks searching for safe and quote GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 27 minutes past 1. Now, a senior SNP politician has been branded shameless after launching a bid to drop the oath of allegiance to King Charles in the Scottish Parliament, saying members of the Parliament should be instead pledging their allegiance to the people of Scotland.
Yes, Kevin Stewart started his campaign after Grenada, one of the 15 countries where the King is head of state, decided to drop the oath of allegiance from its national parliament. So he presumably thought I'd follow suit.
Well, the Scottish Conservatives have slammed Mr Stewart and accused the SNP of focusing on constitutional navel-gazing instead of tackling real priorities.
Well, GB News Royal correspondent Cameron Walker joins us now to discuss. It's all a bit student union, isn't it, Cameron?
Well, it is a little bit tit for tat, isn't it? Perhaps they're a bit bored in the August period and the summer period. Yes, so this motion has about 10 supporters from the SNP, 1 from Labour and 1 from Green at the last count. No Conservatives, funnily enough. The pledge basically says we want to swear allegiance to the people of Scotland rather than the King. The rules as it stands date back to the Scotland Act of 1998, which is of course a UK-wide piece of legislation, which means even if any vote was passed in Holyrood, it wouldn't make a difference because it's of course it's the UK Parliament that would have to either change the law or give more devolved powers to the Scottish Parliament. So the cynic in me and the criticism would be that it's a bit of a publicity stunt because he's not actually going to change the rules. But of course Republicans will say, well, this is a reminder that we Republicans, against our will, still have to swear an oath to King Charles, because of course if they refuse to do so, they're not allowed to sit in Parliament, not allowed to vote in Parliament, or indeed sit in the chamber itself.
I can understand why, from a Scottish nationalist perspective, you might not want to have this oath front and centre. After all, it reminds Scots of the history of that country, that the original Scottish Parliament opened with an oath to the King, or indeed the Queen, and it was James VI and First who united the crowns, who went from being King of Scotland to also being King of England, setting our countries on the trade to union. And I suppose if you're a nationalist, you kind of want to forget the hundreds of years that these two countries have been under one form or other of political union.
Yeah, and Kevin Stewart, the MSP, the SNP one, who has lodged this motion, says, "My loyalty is to the folk of Aberdeen and to the people of Scotland as a whole, and every politician should feel likewise." Of course, the Scottish Conservatives have taken a lot of umbrage to that in a saying that he should be focusing on the real issues like NHS waiting times, the growing economy and restoring standards in our schools, etc., etc. And you may think, well, is any new MSP really going to be banned from Parliament if they don't swear allegiance to the King? Well, something very similar you may remember last year happened in Westminster when the Labour MP Clive Lewis didn't do the oath properly, protested, said that I take this oath under protest, and then was reminded under the Parliamentary Oaths Act of 1966 that he could be fined or indeed have to vacate his seat if you don't do it properly.
That was so annoying. He had to do it again, didn't he?
He did.
And he still did it in a bit of a
Well, I mean, the
sneaky way.
traditional way to do it with protest, as SNP members of the House of Commons
They go like
have
this,
usually
don't
done. Yeah, you cross your hands behind your back as you say the oath. I mean, there are
That's still so naff.
But it's time honoured, and if you're a principled Republican, I mean, fair enough, make your little
God's
protest.
sake.
But I suppose a lot of people will be asking the question: is this really the priority of a country that is experiencing zero economic growth, where energy bills are through the roof, where trade wars are raging around the world, and people are feeling less secure in their own houses?
Well, that's what the Scottish Conservative MSP Murdo Fraser has told us. He made that exact point, Tom, that they should be focusing on the real issues of this country. Of course, the SNP would take umbrage